Sometimes you don't go to a horror movie for great story, characters, or cinematography. No. You just go for a few imaginative death scenes. It's a low bar, admittedly, but it can genuinely be the difference between a movie that's bad and is never talked about again, and a movie that's bad and still comes up on lists like this decades later. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 god-awful horror movies with amazing kills. Number 8, Mirrors. Say what you want about the story, acting, and final twist of the Kiefer Sutherland-led Mirrors, but this thing fully committed to the bit. From the very first throat slit, you know it's gonna go hard. But the reason that Mirrors still comes up in lists like this is absolutely down to the face-splitting bathroom scene. Here, the sister of Sutherland's Ben, Angie, is running herself a nice little bath. After quickly checking the mirror, she moves over to the tub, only her reflection doesn't follow. Instead, as the real Angie relaxes, her twisted shadow slowly begins to pry her mouth open. And from here on out, we cut back and forth as both Angies see their jaw be forcibly removed from their heads, one of them screaming in pain and the other watching on with a sinister grin. Now the scene lives up to director Alexandra Aja's Splatterhouse reputation and no doubt scarred a few of us who watched this thing way too young as kids, but the unrated version of the scene in particular is just nuts. It's almost certainly something that we can't show here because it just ups the blood and viscera and fear factor by 10, but it is something you should check out. Number 7, Saw 3D. Saw 3D was a disappointing finale to the original run of franchise films, but it did have the good graces at least to deliver a few final death scenes that lived up to the series' name. And while yes, some of these are a bit daft, at least they did have the decency to be memorably daft, whether that was the outlandish car trap or the pain train. But in terms of genuinely great inventive traps, for my money, it absolutely has to be the so-called silent circle that comes out on top. And that's because of its simplicity. In the trap, it sees a woman trapped in the middle of a circle with 4 pointy bars pointed at her throat. The subject of the game this time around, Bobby, has to retrieve a key from inside the victim's stomach that's attached to a fishhook and line to ultimately free her. And the twist is, the more the victim screams, because let's face it, that would bloody hurt, the quicker the bars actually extend, getting her closer to death that little bit quicker. So this trap has pretty much everything you'd want from this series. There's the terrifying ticking clock, there is an extremely painful yet surprisingly non-graphic implement of pain, and then there's the final twist that you know every single scream is just getting this person one step closer to their ultimate demise. The payoff might not be the most spectacular in the entire series, but man, what a build-up. Number 6, AVP Requiem. You know, leveling with you for a second, I think AVP Requiem might be the first time I felt real disappointment over a movie when I was a young lad. It wasn't without its good ideas though, particularly when it came to the concept of the Predalien, a combination of the 2 titular monsters that was teased at the end of the first movie. Now the Predalien gets up to no good generally throughout most of this movie, but its most sinister act comes in a sequence that sees it invade a maternity ward and use the pregnant women there as its alien incubators. It's an incredibly uncomfortable sequence, a properly nasty bit of filmmaking as we see the Predalien implant eggs in a woman's throat and later have them burst from her belly with a whole bunch of tiny aliens wriggling around in the viscera. And yeah, if you've seen it or even just heard that description, it might seem wrong to refer to this as an amazing scene because it is genuinely, truly disturbing, but in terms of delivering a real body horror spectacle that gets under your skin and implants itself into your brain, it does do the job. It definitely does the job. Fortunately, you can't see much anyway because the lighting in this movie is just so bad you can't make anything out. Number 5, Deadly Friend. There are few filmmakers, if any, who have had as much influence on the world of horror as Wes Craven. But one of the best kills concocted by the horror maestro wasn't in Scream or A Nightmare on Elm Street or The Hills of Eyes. It was rather in one of Craven's weakest efforts, a sci-fi horror called Deadly Friend. Now this horror opens with WizKid Paul arriving in a new town where he instantly falls for a woman named Samantha. When Samantha's abusive father throws her down the stairs to save her life, Paul then installs a microchip in her brain, which unfortunately makes her go a little bit talking heads, i.e. turns her into a psycho killer. That joke's so bad I can't even get through it. And in the film's most insane but memorable sequence, Samantha throws her next door neighbor Elvira against a wall and then picks up a basketball. After that, with the force of a cannon, Samantha launches this ball at her neighbor's face, which just causes her head to explode like a watermelon being shot with a shotgun. It is hilariously over the top, with Elvira's mad screams being met with this basketball being launched at light speed. It's nuts, it's crazy, and seriously, that final effect kind of gives Scanners a run for its money. Number 4, The Final Destination. Like Saw 3D, The Final Destination, which is the 4th movie in this franchise, might be a complete tire fire when it comes to story and characters, serving up one of the flattest and most boring entries in the whole series, but it at least, again, did have the good graces to give us a couple of deaths from the Grim Reaper himself that lived up to the franchise name. And while, annoyingly, a lot of these are kind of ruined by the cheap and tacky 3D effects that are bolted onto them, we'll always have the pool sequence to remember fondly. Yeah, in the older days you had Casablanca's We'll Always Have Paris, and now we'll always have the scene in Final Destination 4 where the guy's guts get sucked out of his ass. Anyway, this grisly demise is saved for a character named Hunt, who, after getting absolutely bullied by a young kid and his super soaker, jumps into the pool to search for a coin. And while underwater, he just so happens to get caught by a faulty drainage system, which begins sucking him to the bottom of the pool itself, with his ass quite literally being vacuumed and him unable to pull himself away due to the sheer force of it, as the suction does its job and nearby pipe bursts from the pressure, with Hunt's insides now being spewed onto the outside. And while we don't get to see the body, thankfully, we do get a nice little fear of the bottom of pools for the rest of our goddamn life, so, you know, a decent trade-off. Number 3, The Happening. M. Night Shyamalan is a filmmaking menace. Never has Hollywood seen such a frustrating mixed bag of talent and potential that sometimes bears cinematic gold and sometimes gives you one of the worst movies you ever saw in your life. And though The Happening's reputation precedes itself as the nadir of the director's filmography, it is not without merit, admittedly. The reason why people hate it so much is because that initially, it kind of seems like a really cool movie with a really cool idea. Hell, you might actually think you're in for a Stone Cold classic from the opening scene, which sees a group of construction workers ominously leap off their site to their death for no apparent reason. It's a genuinely inventive and scary sequence that sets the tone and gets audiences asking questions that will ultimately have incredibly disappointing answers in an hour's time. But that's not the only effective death sequence either. You've got the eerie towns that are full of people who have killed themselves via hanging, a man who feeds himself to a lion, and the scene where the civilians calmly take turns picking up a handgun to blow their brains out, which is incredibly powerful, really. Like, you might find that a little bit silly in just how kind of out there it is, but in the moment, in a better movie, it would really work. So yeah, what did I say at the start? A frustrating mixed bag. Number 2, Anaconda. Anaconda is a B-movie through and through. You've got cheesy one-liners, you've got actors just there to collect a paycheck, you've got an unconvincing CGI snake, you've got an unconvincing animatronic snake, and of course you've got Jon Voight there overacting like his life depends on it. But if you push through all of the derivative dialogue and the dull performances, you can't say that it doesn't deliver on crazy snake action. All kills are fun enough, but of course we can't talk about Anaconda without mentioning the iconic sequence from that movie, and that is, of course, the moment where Jon Voight's character, Paul, manages to get crushed and then eaten and then spat out by the titular snake. See, when our reptilian four corners, old Paulie boy, coils around him, grinding his bones to dust, before the 40-foot-long serpent swallows the hunter whole. However, it doesn't seem that Paul sits right with the snake's tum-tum as it spits him back up a couple seconds later. And of course, just before he drops dead, the saliva-slathered poacher gives Jennifer Lopez's character a cheeky wink before he goes. So yeah, consider your sins forgiven, Anaconda. You're alright by me. Number 1, Piranha 3D. I don't think anyone was expecting much from a movie called Piranha 3D, and yeah, we were expecting even less from its sequel, Piranha 3DD, which of course did just feature a pair of boobs prominently displayed on the poster because. But despite its poor quality, Piranha 3D is kind of a must-watch for creature feature fans, thanks to its inventive death scenes, and especially the one where you see a whole bunch of characters being offed by boat engines, propellers, and a whole host of other Final Destination-esque death traps. But of course, the best scenes are saved for the titular creatures themselves, and the most horrific death goes to sleazy porn director Derek Jones. See, after falling into the water, the prehistoric predators chow down on Derek's lower body, whittling it down to just the bone. And just when you think you've seen everything, a piranha then comes along and takes a bite out of Derek's, well, little Derek. After a moment, the devilish fishy barfs the appendage back up, giving us an uncensored shot of a half-eating, again, little Derek floating through the sea. The first half of this thing may be trash, but once the kills get going, it's hard to have a bad time, honestly. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below about these death scenes and these movies, and are there any other amazing death scenes that are hidden in god-awful films that you know? Let us know, and while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and check out What Culture Horror for more videos like this on the regular. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thank you so much for watching and putting up with this guy. I'll see you soon.